Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. Just to begin, um, due to this being a live stream, opinions and thoughts are encouraged from the listeners to be shared in the moment that anything uh, thought provoking occurs from your own end, from your own mind. But anyways, the title of tonight's episode is "The Value of a Multidimensional Perspective." And so I've actually here written evolution of realms, but I'm going to actually put evolution of reality, but I'm going to talk about realms. Now one can say that when you look at the stars and when you look at a picture of a galaxy, you're in some sense seeing an incredible amount of spheres of light, and you're at the same time seeing an incredible amount of planets and solar systems. Now, what that means is just like how each planet is its own world, we conclude that many worlds are kept in one moment. So, our solar system, our most greatest inspiration of our ancestors and everything, was that when you look at the stars, the macrocosmic evokes a multi-dimensional structure. You know, you begin seeing various, how can I tell you, it's like our inspiration tends to be a sort of lift off from one mode of existence into another. When I look at religions, when I look at spirituality, even when I look at science, I see that all human beings are constantly engaged is where they are going and how their eyes are in some sense emerging in this existence. And so what happens is when your intelligence emerged on this world, it was in some sense attributeless. As the attributeless were taken, it's as if your personality was a sort of abstract container, and as the world poured itself into it, suddenly ancient memories became modern dreams. The stars do not the stars that we see exist in beams of light that are reflecting data from different parts of the universe. So when I saw light, light for me was a great messenger. And when you look at a lot of, in some sense, religious imagery, God, in some sense, the kingdom of heaven is there are angels as you walk up that staircase. So the notion is that light was the revelation. Religion is a metaphor for light. Suddenly something was revealed, a new way of approaching the context of the world entered man's mind. And so we shouldn't really judge, 6th century people with, for example, in 2019 modern times, atheists very easily diminish theists, and theists very easily dismiss atheists. And for me, it's a notion of a sort of presence of each phenomena in their own domain, while at the same time they all extend in one way. They're all extensions of one way. For me, this is a notion, this is one of these ideas that I was very happy to, in some sense, discover in the depths of my own psyche. I thought that if the atom was in some sense the smallest form of existence, in some sense, one of the smallest forms, even quarks or the electron or whatnot, if that is the smallest form, I wondered about the opposite and what is the grandest form. And then I recognized religion is worshiping the macrocosmic, science is worshiping the microcosmic. And what I mean by that is, I'm not in some sense saying astrophysicists don't exist, but I'm saying that science cannot accept unless the macrocosm fits into the microcosm. But religion, in some sense, accepts the macrocosm regardless of the microcosm, because there's a sort of notion of a divine will. You know, just like how Plato said, as above, so below, just like how we see, you know, the planet is orbiting around the sun, in some sense, the attention of the being, of let's say, the religious creature, compared to the scientific creature and the philosophical creature, when God is everything, including nothing, you can't really go anywhere with religion aside from the station of faith. And that faith does not mean it is wrong, but I will tell you, this world is aligns to honesty. So because you're a natural being, in your honesty, your true nature arises. When your true nature arises, something phenomenal happens. Your thoughts begin moving with a natural rhythm rather than an unnatural, enforced kind of rhythm based on, you know, the a sort of time, limited time. It's like there was this yogi who was going to go. This person decided to go into a cave and meditate for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. Certain Tibetan Buddhist practitioners do this, even when it's just in ancient mysticism, that has been the route. It's been a sort of chaotic entrance into the stillness and silence, which once that entrance is in some sense penetrated, once the veil of thoughts has been in some sense ripped not by our knowledge, but by the unknown. When we begin to see the God that we thought is the presence of the moment. The presence of the moment is where phenomena is being witnessed. This witness, by being the mind, stands in a realm of definition where there is a superiority to matter, as if that which moves matter is mind. That is like pretty much how our species is thinking about it. But what I'm kind of trying to say here is that once the individualized, conscious, form-based entity, you know, begins to wonder about the roots of its self-awareness, something unique happens. You pretty much think you're a self and you're aware. But in some sense, when you go into the depth of the unconscious, when your subconscious becomes no longer a forbidden gate, but opens up into the clarity of not a cosmic initiation of a esoteric theatrical performance, but it's one of those things where your level of authentic universal responsibility dictates your personality. So you, in some sense, become very playful with form. You see, as much as an electron could think, it could also not. The issue with objective reality is that it cannot be anything else than what is given. for me, I believe if you just think facts are based on physical reality, you have forgotten the fact that, in some sense, each of us, what we consider to be ourselves, is a linguistic simulation. It is a very hyper focused, incredibly multidimensional movement of attention behind your eyes that, in some sense, you don't even notice it. But like that person suddenly feels like someone's staring behind them, that's because your intelligence is not stationary. Because it is not stationary, it is constantly gazing. So in certain ancient mythologies, you'd see a person with like a certain deity or something, a certain kind of higher being, where this being, its existence was just pure eyes. It was just made of eyes. And so the notion of that was that of the all-seeing phenomena. Now, deeper intuitive authorizations to go within will require you as a human being to wonder what it would be like if you were not constantly storified. Because the issue with time and space is that they are of incredible utility to our subjective kind of landscape, but at the same time, they are the walls up. The problem is that when we create, it's like when you create virtual reality, you are stealing someone's life by giving them an artificial one. You see, and so I remember seeing a picture drawn by this artist where it showed, it was like a very incredibly well drawn picture, and it showed this kid who was just his head was like, he was just like, how would I say it? He was at the corner of the room with a virtual reality headphone on his eyes, and he was in some sense slightly drooling and just sitting there as if like he hadn't stepped out of that virtual reality machine for years. And so the notion is that, not years, sorry, days. And so the whole point of this is that the multidimensionality of reality is the peak of our evolution, but because it can also be the peak of our illusion. So if you were an ancient mystic, like if you were one of those old school kind of, yogi enlightenment fellows, you would probably like be kind of, you know, disturbed by how I'm kind of suggesting we enter the multidimensional, even though I'm trying to say the risks of it first. Because when I give these talks, I'll be honest. Regardless of what we call ourselves, the stories we give ourselves, we are phenomena. We are just the expressions of nature into a sophistication that they can each describe their self. But that self will find itself in awareness. And then awareness will become the cause and the self will become the effect. That's when you truly uh, navigate beyond the clouds of abstraction and multidimensionality. Multidimensionality is very playfully a bridge to an evolution beyond conception. It is kind of like the last frontier, as if we cannot back down now when our ancestors, lived with a sort of the spirit of future guiding their decision. The reason we're living in such an evolved society is that our ancestors saw something incredible that could happen. But the issue that we have as a species currently, I see this in many people in 2019, is that they have, in some sense, they have lost faith in the eternal inspiration of the species. That means we have decided too soon that we cannot go any further. That's the issue with the moral landscape or the moral battlefield of many societies, and just pretty much the collection of societies. Active societies can be said to be the civilization's main engine of movement. The thing is, the more people gather around. People, in some sense, rely on nature for administration. What that means is your lungs, your heart, many of your organs, how your body is here, they are in the domain of nature. But we see that it seems, as scientists say, that the brain, or like this unique organ, this unique muscle, is so capable of just animating itself to itself through language, image, or whatever you want to call, you know, uh, whatever you want to call your nation of images, your imagination. For me, imagination is the extension of reality, but the extension of reality is into the unknown, and the unknown can do anything. You see, that's the risk. That's why you fear the dark, because you can't see anything. The mind doesn't know what to put in. Think of it this way: that every moment you could, let's say you're walking right now, and you suddenly see a squirrel staring at you. On the street, like the squirrel's just wondering what's going on, and it's staring at you. So imagine that now. Imagine in some sense that because the squirrel is staring at you, you have this context, you have the activation of a subjective story. Thoughts are a sort of um, temporary evolution of, it's like a part of your intelligence is being stretched by all the images you have of what you consider your future to be like, or the future of humanity to be, or the future of just existential phenomena and experiential reality to be. But on some level, you kind of see that this is where you transcend the level of a sage and a wise man. You become the unknown man. That means you begin to recognize aspects of your intelligence that are so instantaneous that you could never place them in space and time. So there's always an observer of the phenomena. As if, as I'm speaking right now, I'm also hearing my words, and I wonder, okay, how is this happening? And I begin to recognize that there's a sort of simultaneity of sensory activation, as if you don't just smell the wonders of that, like, that incredible, like, plate of food, unique, high level, luxurious food. And at the same time, as your nose engages with it, so do your eyes, and so do your other senses. And when one of your senses brings in important data, the whole system realigns. As if it's very fascinating. But whichever sense is sensory perception, I'm talking about the five. I'm not going into metaphysical sensory perception. I'm just speaking about the five senses we have. And so the five sensory perception, let's say channels of perception that we have, is that, so again, the more important data enters one of your senses, like just your nose hits the smell of the food, and suddenly, even though you're not in the room, but the smell has come to your nose, your mind begins to animate what the smell could be. So as if all your senses suddenly now look at their commander, whichever sense is active. So I'm telling you, life gets more multidimensional because that's the point of exploration. If you consider you're in a room, whatever, if you just be active in that room, what occurs is you will eventually find a door. And you will eventually find the door kind of through a reverse engineering of how you have believed in the story of the world, but the world's changing all the time, so how could we really have a story? So it's more of like an experiential exploration of what life is, rather than just a sort of conceptual, we sit in our chairs and contemplate the world while the whole thing's been torn apart. It's not one of those things, you know? It's like, we can choose to play the violin on the Titanic, but there are some people that believe we should not go gentle into that thing. Like, I believe our species, if faced with a threat beyond its capability, it must meet that threat beyond its capability. So I had this very unique notion in my childhood that, in some sense, preserved my how would I say it, like, when chaotic things would happen, rather than me defining myself by it, I would put a mirror in front of it. What that means is if I was insulted, I would ask why the insult. I would question where the thought came, you know. And so through that methodology, I began to see we all become incredibly humble when we recognize the validity of a sort of subjective law. That's what wisdom is. It's a sort of recognition of a subjective law, a sort of result from a pattern of repetitive experience. Because you can't make a wise decision unless you've made a foolish one first, because that becomes your reference point. So all those people suffering in the world saying I'm stressed or depressed, oh my god, this is your reference point. And on the other side of whatever story you're telling yourself, if you just saw everything in your story, the other side. So imagine if your story you had like a visible character, you suddenly wondered about an invisible character. If you had a visible world, you wonder about an invisible world. And that's simply just the nature of the duality. That's kind of like me saying the yin yang symbol is echoing in our linguistic realms. That when we storify the world, that world is contained in a sort of dualism. Now, that dualism, you can't say it's good or bad. That's the issue. So if it's just a function, but a function that has not yet been understood. You know, some people, when fear came to them, they in some sense were paralyzed at first. They just didn't know what to do. They were like, holy shit, and they were kind of like in a free fall of ignorance or inability to respond. But some people have said that after fear has approached someone a couple of times, they begin to ride fear. They begin to understand that their free will surpasses any thought that diminishes that free will. That is the ability. You cannot be free externally until internally you are. Internal freedom means your allegiance to thoughts is only in their utility in the moment. Don't go hiding in a bunker of a certain belief. Life is too dynamic. You got to go with its dynamism. You know, you got to write that surfboard, which is how the causality of a moment is being its effects simultaneously. It's very fascinating. Like if I don't know how people their minds are not blown and they're not always just running to explore uh, the greater data structures of our reality. You know, machines can't do shit with data. They can process it, but they like there's no awareness of like what the hell should I do with this. So a machine does not have a soul because it does not have an unknown force that moves it. It is all completely just based on its limited domain of knowledge. So you see, my friends, when I say the value of a multidimensional perspective, and kind of like what I'm saying is that as societies evolve towards the peak of individual performance, imagine every person in the world suddenly just became incredibly successful and they got whatever they wanted. In that moment, what would occur is that once the external objective success has been attained, comes questions of internal sort of collective vision. That's when an incredible renaissance will occur. That means a group of people on this planet will be, in some sense, uh, navigating through certain conversations that's going to make the children of the world wake up because the way they had valued the world at first was wrong. There's two ways you get educated, okay? Either the world teaches you or you teach yourself. I really love this quote where I remember hearing it and it says, where there's a will, there's a way. And what that means is if you can see, it doesn't matter whether you succeed or not, just forget about the future and just wonder if you can see a design, if you can see a potential, if right now you could see yourself in some sense functioning by just your ultimate sense of intelligence, whatever that is, how would you be in all that you do? What would be the how would the observer within, in some sense, be the movement of the objects and subjects of observance? Reality will evolve to, in some sense, a recognition that chaos and order are lost in their own dimension. We will move beyond it. Right now, how if I can kind of, in a zigzag way, kind of draw evolution, I believe evolution moves in a zigzag. It doesn't move straight. This is why you can't just, the stories we give our evolution are just, they're art. They're not per se the most accurate. But who knows? We can't go that far back. And even if we have time machines, who would have the time to, use a time machine? So the zigzag modality is how there was a sort of oscillation between efforts of manifestation, complexifying in regards to a more solidified kind of unique individual design, compared to moments where manifestation was more real to itself as the emptiness of it, as the crumbling of the universe, as if ancient Vedic culture was so wise that in some sense it created three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, in some sense, the originator of existence, that which is starting all phenomena, that's the force of the start of the world. And then we have the force of the change of the world, and we have the force of, in some sense, the end of the world. And so Shiva was the god of death, and I believe Vishnu was the god, the maintainer, and Brahma was the god of creation. And so what that meant is that it's as if like ancient mythology is actually how the best way our ancestors thought they could put a message in a bottle and give it to us. And in ancient mythology, you see the structure of ancient identities. When I read the codes of Aristotle and Plato, and when I read like some of their biography, I don't know like how accurate it is, but their actual biography from like a legit source online, what I was kind of seeing was like these people, their identities were so complex. They were so complex because the early philosophers upon this world, they in some sense were people who were evolving internally. So as if evolution occurred without any consciousness, let's say. It was just nature moving, like no point to it. And suddenly this nature managed to, in some sense, evolve to a state where this creature on this planet could say it is separate from the world. So suddenly, from just one moment of just attributeless phenomena, suddenly there came an attribute. From an infinite presence of energy, there became the solidification of a temporal creature. And then from the solidification of that temporal creature came the discovery of the liquidity of the self awareness. The subjective evolution was penetrated the moment we realized the world is separate from us. And so our egos actually are ancient patterns. They're ancient patterns, but they are in some sense as if the best way I'm kind of approaching it now, guys, because I'm limited in 2019. That's my era. Yet I feel there's a timeless presence that also knows the knower before it can know anything. So after this creature became self-aware, it looked at itself in a pond, it recognized it as an individual mover in a sort of grand collective movement. This individual mover, as its senses opened up and activated and played on based on their unknown kind of natural design, as the senses in some sense became activated, Sorry, guys, I'm just writing something. I'm gonna read it. Um, Actually, let me build up to it. Okay, so let's make this simple. Nature's moving, it's all one moment. This attributeless moment becomes divided between the individual and the world. Now, this individuality with the world occurs before there's the, in some sense, penetration of the evolution of the subjective dimension. So, what that means is first the body's senses were recognizing and kind of like a robot transforming into a car and suddenly moving its limbs to recognize its new dimensions of aerodynamism. So, the, what occurred, what occurred was that communication was the early baby steps of the subjective realm being incorporated in the intelligence of the being. Now, there's many ways you can see this. I've kind of playfully kind of had two theories on it, and or hypotheses, unproven kind of ideas on it. But one view is that I kind of felt, okay, if we are in two dimensions in one moment, like honestly, guys, am I like, I'll let you be the judge. Right now, as I'm speaking, do you recognize like there's a physical body, okay? But this physical body, somehow with this spherical awareness of your senses, is in some sense being the thought of you. If I ask you who's listening right now, are atoms listening to me, or is there something else that these atoms we claim that have led to? So you see, there's an objective sort of dimension at this, and there's a subjective dimension. But where my voice is arising is from the subjective dimension and even beyond those skies. So if we consider that just like a coin has two sides, and let's say this coin is being flipped in empty space endlessly, this kind of coin being flipped in empty space is a suggestion of a sort of the subjective self and the objective self and the constant oscillation of an attention beyond both of these realms, the attention of the ultimate witness, in some sense. The ultimate witness of the source of reality becomes how your individual identity is inseparable from the collective presence of all occurring phenomena. So you're aligning yourself, in some sense, oscillating between existence and non existence, and that's what occurs when one side of your brain hemisphere, let's say, playfully takes more control than the other side. Suddenly your creativity overpowers your reason, and your reason in some sense overpowers your creativity. And so the balance can only occur through a recognition of a still central point, as if the only part of the wheel of karma where karma wasn't active was the center of the wheel. The center of the wheel did not move, but the wheel did. In emptiness, everything is gravitating to a center and it's all spinning in change. And this change is a sort of undeniable, inevitable kind of effort of human beings. That means our species, even if it continues, existence doesn't seem to be slowing down. The end of the world, it was such an important concept, and as religions, some strangely religious ideology evoked it into the mainstream, into the collective conscious mind. Trust me, we think we're individuals now. Behind our eyes, we're present in a field of intelligence that incorporates every memory of every living being. It's a sort of ultimate inventor sphere that every inventor has found access to. They have found access to through a trust of the deeper dimensions of their mind. And the deeper dimensions of their mind was not ideological, it was not emotional, it was not it did not have a lot to do with doing or doership. You didn't have to do something to become enlightened anymore. You became a sort of watcher and just you forgot every ideology. You were like, okay, what is this? What is this moment? And when you really get deep, actually, when you really become concentrated, depth is just concentration, by the way, guys. When you concentrate, worlds open up behind the worlds that you see, and this occurs to a sort of objective inspiration for the subjective. When I write, and in some sense, at the same time, there's a sort of movie I'm watching behind my eyes as I speak, and so this movie is a sort of constantly, instantaneously changing of my attention. So it's very hard to keep your attention on just one thing because there will be so in your internal reality there will be so many thoughts passing by that your attention will suddenly be like, what the hell am I doing? Just staring at this one thing. You begin to convince yourself based on a sort of emotional justification. So society is a place of emotional intelligence, and it's a place of, in some sense, subjective conceptual intelligence. Conceptual intelligence means how much there's a sort of clarity, how much you have in some sense taken, allowed your free will to resculpt your inner world with the clarity of the actual outer world. We can't just run it, just hide in our minds and get drunk on the eternity of an infinite thought. The responsibility now comes to balance, and through balance comes three very important principles. Three things that this species, every living being, must begin protecting instantaneously. I don't care if you agree or disagree with it, these three ideas you have to protect. You have to protect also their context, which means any experience that can apply to them. Honesty. Honesty, love, let's say. I remember I had written this down. Honesty, love, and honesty, love, and exploration, which is, oh yeah, there we go. I believe these three ideas are the cure to humanity. We have to protect the lovers of this world. They create us. We have to protect the honesty of the world. They maintain us. Honesty maintains civilization. When a civilization becomes dishonest, it becomes scared and hopeless. And so it allows destruction to devour it, even though it's not its time. Our species has, a good fight left. It is a great fight, the last fight of every being, every individual being, in some sense realizing they never were a story. And if you never were a story, what are you? The presence of the moment is so unknown that your knowledge bows before it. That is the state that I'm speaking about. You just stop trying to shape the outer world or make the outer world have to listen to your inner world. You free the outside world from your internal bewildered disturbance of it. Now, I gotta get to this. I got a lot of ideas to cover, but so two theories. I'm just gonna read it. One is we are waves emanating from the core of the planet. Uh, I said, oh, the subjective evolution. So as if like in this theory, my opinion was like in that moment I kind of saw the moment and I was like, wait a minute, could it be that in a subtler realm beyond our sensory perception, where our presence exists, but our personality, which is just based on our consciousness, cannot penetrate until it accepts greater validity of a sort of universal law to the inner and outer phenomena, the inseparability of individual and cosmic activity. Until you reach that station of self-awareness, your awareness and self are constantly not in conflict, not at war, but in some sense they are defined by their own realms rather than recognizing the moment. Truth can only be found in a moment. Where else can truth be? That's a kind of enlightenment hack for you. The second theory, which I want to share with you, which is honestly like I feel very close about this. I feel this is actually what's going on. What we think we are as people. I feel we are a seed of a tiny, either bacteria or particle, tiny particle planted by extraterrestrial attention, which have imprinted in the design. How can I tell you guys? Like I can't finish this here. I can't read my own hand. But the idea is that I kind of thought, okay, what's going on? Perhaps changing all the time. That I don't know. It was like some neurological study that said a person gets this amount of thoughts throughout the day, as if neurologists were really claiming they knew exactly how many thoughts a person had in a day. you know, that's very precious to me. That idea. Of course, neurology is a wonderful knowledge. So my notion was that it's as if like there have been conditions on this planet where only bacteria has existed. There has been a sort of close to a mass extinction, an extinction of even the tiniest life form. And so somehow some life, tiny life form continued, and through a scientific lens, in some sense, we see evolution from this tiny bacteria or whatever, in some sense, becoming the sophistication of our current civilization. So in some sense, scientifically, we came from bacteria, you know. But I don't disagree with it because I believe that bacteria was a sort of within it or whatever that tiny particle was that lived on. We are a seed of an extraterrestrial designed to endlessly, pursue the evolution of just conscious existence. We are made in the image of wonder, in an image of like recognizing self and awareness and how they're both being the moment and then at the same time. The multidimensional perspective has as much value as the individual vision's kind of totality in our lives. You gotta, it's like you can't, you shouldn't, like those people in the New Age community or whatever that want to kill the ego or destroy the ego. Even Zen masters, they had this term where they would say, kill the Buddha, as if the student would suddenly meditate and think he's Buddha, and he'd come and say, yo, Zen master, I think I'm Buddha. And then the Zen master was like, kill the Buddha. It was a sort of kind of wise, a mirror of wisdom through language that the Zen master would give the student. So either objective reality was planted in subjective reality, or subjective reality was planted in objective reality. And as something is planted, it starts from a lesser state, and the whole purpose of just growth is that it's constant. It changes into either more, or it changes, or at least moves towards a peak of being more. before even the confirmation of an eternal presence or a temporary personality. Pretty much you see how the world is being you and how you're being the world. Whenever you feel you're being the world, that's the presence of your mind that watches, in some sense, how the body is personalized. You personalize yourself by every experience, learning something new and just evolving how the world is. That's why they said you gotta have the explorer's attitude. That's why you gotta protect creativity because in some sense, without creativity, purpose cannot exist. Without that unexplored, unknown terrain, their knowledge will have no wonderland. And it goes on a zigzag pattern. Like it's 2019 now, everybody's obsessed about matter, so yeah, about a materialistic framework of reality. So like there's always a counterculture that comes and says, okay, everybody thinks they're just objects. You're not objects. And then in ancient times, you see they had these mythological kind of subjective structures to their cultures and cities and statues and whatnot. And that sort of metaphysical story behind the world dictated how their free will moved. And so in those moments, the atheists would, in some sense, arise to bring mankind. So in some sense, it's very fascinating. I find it hilarious. The atheist, out of his love for reason and clarity, is fighting the blindly religious, and at the same time, you know, those who are in some sense the devotees of religion, those who look at religion and see it as a road of devotion, not a road of chaos, as if devotion is the highest ideal, because the whole point of religion is it's telling the religious man, pay attention to God, not don't pay attention to the world. And those people who go do extreme actions, they're not even being properly religious. They are forgetting the ultimate is the decider, and the ultimate has given certain restrictions of behavior. If you go tell every common man, you ask him, yo man, what's the problem with religion? You say religion is like too strict. It's just saying you can only be valid in only these structures of thought. But you go and see that the reason those structures of thought are being suggested to be where the ultimate validity lies, you know, and I would like to say, no pun intended, but there's a sort of potential of how far the integration of one man's vision or 8 billion people's vision can lead. We are not just 8 billion bodies, we're at 8 billion minds. I remember I was speaking to a friend, we were walking downtown Toronto, and we were having a very philosophically oriented conversation about the ethics of civilization as it pursues, as it walks into the eons, and walks through the eons. And so, in some sense, I came into the conclusion that whenever you see, like when you walk in downtown Toronto, even though Toronto is Canada is a great place, but when you walk downtown Toronto, you see an incredible kind of carelessness, as if that's when I'm walking downtown Toronto, I see a sort of how society is honestly a brutal machine. A machine that if you cannot have to uh, enough money, you cannot have enough food, as if we care about money more than poverty. And that's sad. That's sad because there will eventually come a time where the karmic echo of that decision will be witnessed. And so it is unnecessary. And so through the religious restrictions, one could say they allow themselves to have a decent morality, which is ethically just worshiping God all day, to recognize that God is like the unfathomable, yet we worship it. and yet it is the mover of the stillness, and so of moments of stillness that arise, and so you come into these modes of thought. Like I have not just entered mosques. I have entered the subjective realms of many religions fearlessly. For me, I had a warrior mentality towards the chaotic unknown, and that's because I was a spoiled kid. So a spoiled kid feels he can do anything, which internally is a sort of gift of confidence, but externally is a blind arrogance to the responsibility of the universal presence of intelligence on this surface of this planet. Poverty, you know what poverty is? It's not just a sad story, a sob story that we must all just wonder about our decisions, but poverty is a suggestion that the intelligence on the surface of this planet, the intelligence that has extended from this universal sector, is inefficient. It is in disharmony. Its greater possibility is not being applied. That means the moment you're dishonest, you have denied yourself greater intelligence. Your mind will, through guilt, begin to, in some sense, deny itself an availability of wonder and knowledge. And these are very important to be aware of. Because you do not just live once. For the world, dynamic, it's like through an eternal engine, temporary forms that are endlessly generated. Imagine this eternal 3D printer that it just endlessly made form after form after form, and you begin to wonder how the output reflects the input, and you begin to see the input has no output. The input has no, like, there's nothing where the input comes from because it is not in the domain of the engine. So, unfortunately, as much as I like to believe that we're just in this objective reality, I consider that's just the starting zone. That's just the liftoff platform. Once the pilot of consciousness navigates, once the present being, in some sense, allows their attention to shift through natural rhythms, their mind begins to activate. As their mind activates through altered states of just incredibly being in the zone and doing something rhythmically in the world, you begin to see like what occurs is that you enter a higher state of experience, subjective experience. Subjectively, there's something unique going on, but then you step out of that subjective uniqueness, and so the greater experiences that you've had in certain moments, the peak experiences of your lifetime, those in some sense are kept in your memory. So it's like it was an honor to experience life in that moment. And then you suddenly have this sort of universal honor that what if life was all succeeding? What if we don't try to create a utopia or try to not have a dystopia? Let us just think that what if there was only one command given to mankind, and it was advance, regardless of however you interpret that word. The word advance is in some sense the most important. It is the center of our evolution and its inspiration. I hope this talk has served you. And this is my mentality. I think this is what works. I think all the problems in life can be solved through this approach. That you recognize freedom, or let me say it like this: honesty is an ultimate moment of your awareness. The multidimensional perspective bows to its singularity just to recognize the singularity is not a singularity until the multidimensionality is there. We are creatures where our intelligence is it's like the purpose of matter was to become a sort of subjective phenomenon. The purpose of this subjective phenomenon was to continue matter until it began to recognize it was neither the objective phenomenon nor the subjective phenomenon. That's when the unknown has to confront itself in unknown ways. And that's when, in some sense, we don't have to worry too much about because it is beyond the sphere of our civilization's knowledge. It'll just be something that will happen to us that we don't understand, so the approach must be playful. There are many mysteries in this world, and you are one of them. Go buy a stack of printer paper or a notebook or something, and just begin actually writing how the world occurs behind your eyes, and you share that with mankind, then you have, in some sense, made the greatest contribution. You have shared more data about how intelligence moves behind your eyes. A noble pursuit, the evolution of reality beyond the multidimensional society into the acceptance of the unknown as the unknown. Much blessings and namaste.